we had the poll open. Getting customers was one of the things that everybody wanted to talk about. It was split with raising capital, which we could come back to. But getting customers, I think that kind of goes into building the business and possibly scaling. But your thoughts on getting customers, I guess, I think that falls probably into sales as well. But are there tips and tricks that you possibly give to a company that maybe you're on the board to or that you're advising on that you can share with everybody on here?
I mean, that's such a hard question because there's, I personally invest in companies that sometimes are selling to consumers, sometimes they're trying to attract consumers so they can sell advertisements, sometimes they're trying to sell to small businesses, sometimes enterprises, and each one kind of even defining what the customer is, let alone how you get the customer, is so different. And so, in order to provide an answer that's maybe helpful and sufficiently generic to address all those, I would say sort of two principles that I encourage entrepreneurs to follow. The first is react to the data, not what you hope the data say. And so whatever you're doing, if it's working and the customers are eating the dog food or coming and paying for the product, that's great, keep doing it. If it's not working, it's not the customer's fault, it's your fault. You need to try something else. And I think the biggest mistake entrepreneurs make, which seems so simple, is holding on to hope as opposed to reacting to what they're actually seeing in the data. And so it's this intellectual honesty and realism that I think is really important. That doesn't mean, by the way, that when it's not working, whatever you're doing is not working, you should sort of give up or get depressed about it. In fact, the best entrepreneurs react really positively to that situation and say, great, like I now have a clear signal on what I need to do and it's something else. How can I change? And that leads to the second principle, which is as you're trying to figure out a problem, and whether that problem is getting my first customer or my nth customer or whatever that problem is, I think a key success criteria for startups is the ability to iterate and experiment quickly and inexpensively. And so if you have a specific hypothesis as to an approach you might take with customers, figure out a way to try it in a highly imperfect way to get some signal back on whether it might work. Don't spend hours, let alone days or weeks, maybe hours is okay, but not days or weeks, perfecting what it's going to look like or exactly what the script is. Get out there and try it and get data back from the customers. Or if it's a product, don't spend many, many months trying to get the product in the hands of customers. Try to find a way to get that product in the hands of customers much sooner, even if it's in a more crude or raw form, to get feedback. Because it's the feedback, which is the data, that allows you to then adjust and make better decisions. And if you spend a really long time essentially in hibernation working on some problem and then magically release it and think it's going to be perfect, you'll be hugely disappointed because typically speaking, the birth of something over many, many months doesn't work all that well. And what takes it from a failure to a success is getting feedback from customers and iterating really rapidly. In fact, I'll give you a good example. Before we invested in Pinterest, which is quite a while ago now, back in 2011, the founders built a product called Tote. And it was a totally different consumer product. And they thought it was going to be great. But what ended up happening was consumers were using one specific small feature within Tote in a way that the founders didn't expect consumers would care so much about. And when they realized that was the one thing that was working, they ditched the entirety of the Tote product and focused on that one feature, which was essentially Pinterest. They never would have been able to deduce that or figure that out had they not gotten it into the hands of consumers in a somewhat viable way to get the feedback, process the data, and realize what they should do next. So experimentation, especially cheap and rapid experimentation, is absolutely critical.
How about now you have the data, you have the business working, you have the funding. Can you give us some thoughts on hiring, what you tell your portfolio companies as they scale, just thoughts on how to hire? Obviously, you want the best people in the room with you, but maybe how to communicate that, and then kind of leads into company culture as well, and your thoughts on company culture and how to make the best company culture you could possibly have, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few thoughts on that. So for starters, it sort of depends. I think the important thing is you as a founder and a CEO have to decide what is the culture you want, what is the style and the mode you want, and make sure that maybe not everybody, but as close to everybody you hire is willing to embrace that culture and fit into that culture. and help propagate that culture. It's especially important early on because the first several people you hire are infinitely more influential in how that culture gets shaped than the 100th or the 200th or the 1000th person. I'd say there are basically two styles of team building that I've seen work really well. For illustrative purposes, I'll describe what I think of as the Shopify style and the Pinterest style. Two very successful companies I've had the privilege to be around. The Shopify style has been to hire people who are generally quite young and early in their career into what becomes the biggest job they've ever had, and try to help support them in every way, shape, and form they can to grow in that position. And as a result, a good portion of the existing management team at Shopify, which is now whatever it is, a $40, $50 billion company, have been at Shopify for a long time and are in, like I said, the biggest job they've ever had, and have grown in that job from a relatively small role to a much bigger role, including Toby, the founder and CEO himself. He had never run anything before Shopify. In fact, he sort of built the company accidentally while trying to make a snowboard shop. In contrast, Pinterest's hiring approach, obviously there are lots of really young and talented people who have tons of growth and running room within Pinterest as well, but most of the leadership team of Pinterest were hired into their jobs having had really deep and fantastic experience doing something similar at another company where they could bring that experience and knowledge to bear. And so you've got to sort of build them up from the bottom approach, and you have a higher, super seasoned, experienced talent from the beginning. Those are as far opposite in approach as you could possibly imagine, and yet they both work extremely well. But obviously the cultural implications and the recruiting approach you take for both differ dramatically. And so for me, the answer is there is no right culture, there is no right approach. You have to do sort of what you as a founder or CEO think is both necessary for the business and is in the style that you want to build the business, as opposed to what you think might be better because you read it in some book or something like that.